Welcome to the Ricecast. I'm your host, Dan Pigsley, and sitting across from me, as always, is my friend and yours, Pastor Willie Rice. Pastor, how are you doing today?
Doing great, thanks, Dan.
Good. Well, it's good to see you. I know last week was very different. It was my first, our first mishap on the podcast since I jumped in. Our equipment fried. I kind of did this, pre-announcement on the podcast, like, hey, listen, this is what happened, and we kind of left off on a conversation, which was a great conversation. But we got new equipment now. We're ready to go. I'm excited about it. There's buttons everywhere. Everything's lighting up. Our communications department did a great job putting this together for us. But man, it's been a great week at Calvary. A lot of celebrating things,
So
not just our new equipment. Yeah.
Basically, the podcast was so hot, we blew the equipment.
That's
out.
it. It fried. It just completely fried the equipment. So, but it's this. I mean, you're looking at it. There's so many buttons on this thing. We'll figure it out though. It's a lot. So I'm just gonna stare at it the entire time. Sorry about that. But I mean, I can sit here and celebrate our new equipment. But there's other things we can celebrate in the life of Calvary.
It's been a great week, and I look forward to re-engaging the conversation. We had already talked about it being a part one, part two anyway. So this is great to come back to that. But it was a great weekend here at Calvary across our campuses. 56 baptisms this Sunday. It was a special baptism Sunday, as the people here in our church know, which, again, I think every Sunday is a baptism Sunday, and every Sunday is a gospel Sunday. But there are harvest moments where we go, hey, today we're going to try to really share the gospel very clearly and really encourage people to make a response to the Lord. And if they haven't, they need to. And there are moments where, I think it's just so helpful to do that. And you see the Holy Spirit work and move. And we saw so many incredible stories over the weekend across our campuses. 8 were baptized at our Calvary Espanol. Fantastic. I think every campus saw some things, some baptisms. And we had a bunch here at Clearwater, 56 total.
Yep.
And so we praise God for all the stories of life change and all the people who made public their commitments to follow Jesus.
Well, it's one thing. I just want to spend a moment. Like, one story that we heard yesterday even came out of CCHS, our school, and what an incredible story.
There were several CCHS students who were baptized. It was beautiful to see that. Several young ladies in the second service, one of our baseball players in the first service, which may be the story you're referencing, and how that family's, has been coming to church, has been a radical gospel impact in that family. And the whole baseball team was here to see their friend get baptized. So we just praise the Lord for great stories of life change, confessing Christ, and it's what we do, and it's what we get to celebrate today.
Yeah, that's great. And so, if you haven't driven by the Clearwater campus lately, baseball season, softball season, they're about to fire up. Yeah. And they're looking good this year, too, both of them.
Well, we have 2 good teams there, and, you can always go to cchs.us. There's a link on our Calvary US website to our school, and get the schedule.
Yep.
And, if you're looking for something to do here on one of these winter or early spring nights, baseball, softball, it's a lot of fun to come watch these kids, and they play really high caliber. You're looking at some people out there who will be college players, a lot of whom, and some of whom have even come through here, are now playing professional baseball. Yep. And I don't know if they have professional softball. Maybe, I don't know. But they certainly have high level.
They do,
softball, and we've got some young ladies who are very good, and so it's just fun to watch it. It's a fun atmosphere, very family oriented. So, where our basketball teams are playing, I think our girls lost their district game last night, so I think their season's done. Yeah. I think I'm right on that. Okay. I know they lost, but I think that was it. But they had a really great year.
They did.
A great year. And then the boys are still playing and getting into the tournaments. In fact, I think there's a game tonight, and I'm not sure what time. I think later tonight, and then throughout the week.
Yeah, I've brought my kids a couple of the boys in the girls' basketball games. They're no joke.
We're very very proud of our athletics at CCHS, and the kids do a great job.
Brand new softball field this year too.
Brand new softball field. We'll have a dedication for that late February, and I can't. Date escapes me. I won't say something.
That's
like
good.
The 25th or something. Yeah. But again, if you go on the CCHS website, you'll probably get that information. And we'll have a big dedication in the first game, and it'd be a lot of fun to have our young ladies to have now a facility as good as our young men do.
I love that. Well, it's just so encouraging. It's so incredible to be part of just Calvary and just be able to see the Lord using our school and our campuses and so many different things just for His glory. And I don't know. It brings joy to my heart to be able to bring my kids up here and just see, hey, this is what we're a part of, you know.
So many ministries happening that we don't always highlight. Sometimes on the podcast we've highlighted them, but you've got Collide Weekend coming up in a couple of weeks, which is, I heard yesterday, over 340 students already signed up for that. I think that's coming up in a weekend or so. Again, all this information is online, or you may put some.
I'll put some links up. Yeah.
The No More Orphans event coming at the end of the month, which is a big deal. So there's a lot of things happening. We praise God for it, and looking forward. Depending on when people listen to this, we have a great prayer gathering tonight with Pastor Jim Simbala. Our friend will be here. And again, some people may not hear that in time, but anyway, we're praising God for all the wonderful things that are happening.
It's been awesome.
Very thankful.
Yep, absolutely. So I do want to pick up where we left off last week, if you're okay with that. We did a part 1, so I feel like we should do a part 2. We left off last week. We really focused in on a Christian worldview, a biblical worldview of how we should approach DEI, and we really started getting to immigration. And we kind of left out on this idea that, hey, if you are in a official role, like a police officer, or you use the our sheriff, like, you have a job to do, and your job is to uphold the law. Our job as the church is to be compassionate. And so I want to continue. I would like to ask you, just continue to dive into that a little bit more and tell us where our thoughts are.
Yeah, and as you know, that's an oversimplification, but it's a difference of roles. And I think just to set up why we're talking about this, not because it's just in the political conversation right now, which it is in the culture. It's because it is a political conversation with deeply profound theological undertones and as to how we understand this. So it has created some questions among Christians as they are trying to think through these issues that they are processing politically, and they're asking, okay, what is the right, biblical worldview interpretation of this? What is the consistent Christian view? How should I, as a follower of Jesus, process these complicated issues? Because you'll hear things from a variety of perspectives, left and right. And of course, we also are all wearing our own political glasses when we try to view these things and make assumptions. But as much as we can, as fallible human beings can, if we just set aside our political, our tribal lens for a moment and ask, okay, what is the appropriate way that as a follower of Jesus, as a believer in the Bible, we process these issues? Because there does seem to be a conflict, and or at least complications. And we talked about last week the DEI initiatives that have been so in the news, and that at first take, words like diversity and equity sound just almost uniformly positive. And then when you scratch around and you begin to look at, well, what is being done in the name of those things, and even especially what is the word equity, and how does it differ from equality, and is there a difference in talking about equality of opportunity versus the equality of outcome, and how one is about freedom and the other is very much about control. And so we got into that in part 1, if you're just picking up on this. So it's a big, and we just wanted people to have, again, a fuller, theologically grounded way of looking at these things. Because here's what happens. People's emotions get manipulated sometimes by words, and you begin to think, well, if I'm a Christian, I must think this, or if I think this, is that inconsistent with the Bible? So we talked about DEI, and then we were just starting to get into the immigration issue, which is a big one, right? I mean, it's one of the things that, again, regardless of your political viewpoints, one of the things that President Trump made a centerpiece of his campaign, and we have been reading now since he has come into office again about the enforcement at the border, preventing what is called illegal immigration, people who immigrate unlawfully or outside the ordered process that our government has in place, and the people who are here in the country. So this was a huge issue between the Trump-Biden campaigns, and many think it's one of the reasons President Trump, in fact, was elected. Again, that is irrespective of whether you like it or not, but that's the reality. And so now you have these rather aggressive attempts to enforce the laws, A, at the border, and then B, deal with people who are here and who are, and even this word is explosive to some people, but they're here illegally. That means unlawfully. They did not go through a lawful government-approved process to be here. And so some are being sent back home. Some, you know, and what we said was, there is, you know, it feels like a clash of values, because on the one hand, as Christians, we have been taught, to be loving toward our neighbors. We have been taught to be especially compassionate to those who are poor. And even there are explicit commands in the Old Testament that talk about dealing with strangers and aliens in the land. In fact, I was reading in Leviticus this morning. I did my reading, and there was some, rules about how you treat aliens and so forth in the land. So we have that, and then on the other hand, we also believe in the rule of law and the reality of nations to enforce those laws, and we understand that. So how do we get into that morass and in competing values to talk about what is a Christian position on that? That was what we were saying, and what you were referencing a moment ago to kind of get us back to where we were was, we have to understand the difference between, in this case, the realm of the church and the realm of the state. They both are ordained by God. In fact, the Bible speaks of that God has ordained the powers that be, government powers, and He uses and works through those. And by the way, then even beyond that, how do we view situations as individuals? So, like here's an example I started to give, and just to revisit it. It is not inconsistent for a church to have a ministry and go to the local prison and to minister to people who may be imprisoned there. And let's assume for the moment we're talking about people who deserve to be there. They were. There's nothing funny here, and we all hear about tragic cases where somebody missed something. But we're talking about people who committed crimes. They're in prison. So there's nothing inconsistent about going to a prison and ministering to people in that prison in the name of Christ, telling them about the forgiveness that is found in Jesus, teaching them the Bible. We have a seminary that had seminary classes in a prison, and help people graduate with degrees in prison and start churches in prison. And I've heard of churches that had campuses in prisons. We all, I hope, would agree to minister to people whose lives have been broken. They're in prison. That's a wonderful thing. They might be ready to hear and receive the good news of the gospel. But my point was, there's nothing inconsistent with, let's say, a given person in a church going to a prison and ministering the message of Christ and the hope that is in Christ, and at the same time walking out of that prison at the end of the day and saying, I'm glad this prison is here, and I'm glad the sheriff or appropriate law enforcement authorities are putting these people in prison who have violated laws. Those are not inconsistent things. I can love the prisoner and even minister to the prisoner, and at the same time recognize that because of our justice system and our value for justice, this person has maybe committed a crime. I'm grateful that the sheriff is doing his job to arrest that person and to imprison that person. Those are not inconsistent things. And the Christian should not say, because I love people and this person has received the Lord, or this person is growing in the Lord, therefore I want the law to be set aside or the law to be circumvented. I need the sheriff to do the sheriffing, and we can do the evangelizing and the discipling. It doesn't mean we don't want law enforcement to have appropriate compassion, and it doesn't mean that the church should not cooperate with the law. What it means is, though, the primary job of law enforcement is to enforce the law.
Right.
They can do that and be followers of Christ. But their job is to enforce the law for a better society. And as Christians, we can minister to people, even those who have violated the law. Now, you apply that to immigration. It's not inconsistent to say we should be compassionate to people who who have either migrated to this country, who are immigrants living in our midst, and are people who wish they could be here, or just there are some heart-wrenching cases that move compassionate people to act with mercy toward those who need mercy. There's nothing wrong with that.
Right.
But at the same time, we can, and the same person who has a heart of mercy to say, how can I help people who are hurting, can also go, it is appropriate for a country to have a border, to enforce its border and the laws within that border, and to make sure that there is a certain number of people that can immigrate safely and properly for all kinds of reasons. and to enforce that. These are not inconsistent positions. So when someone plays upon your heart to say, oh, the Bible talks about being kind toward the poor, therefore you should have an open border. No, that doesn't translate. In fact, I would argue that isn't compassionate.
Right.
I would argue that opens the door to all kinds of human trafficking and suffering. And I would argue it's fundamentally unfair to the people who do want to migrate to this country and are trying to do it in a lawful, orderly way. So I just want Christians to understand when they're being manipulated by our. It's funny how some people, secularists, who do not believe the Bible, do not adhere to the gospel, love to then quote the Bible to try to manipulate Christians to a particular political viewpoint. Again, we should be compassionate and kind, but we can also support a border, proper immigration, and a government that helps ensure a proper immigration policy. And in cases like this, again, we bring our convictions to bear. And by the way, again, somebody might not be a Christian, but still believe that you should enforce your border and control the flow of immigration into and out for a very utilitarian purpose. There are all kinds of things that affect the number of how many persons a particular nation may want to allow to migrate in their country. The economic impact, the ability of the immigrants to assimilate into the country. And there's not a magic number out there that's the perfect number. But somebody's got to sit down and go, this is the right number. And then enforce the law.
Right.
That's what people are saying. And again, if you want to find somebody who's angry about the law not being enforced, ask a person who's migrated to this country legally. They stood in line, they did everything the right way, and then they watched people cut in line.
Right.
And primarily they were cutting in line because they were being taken advantage of by somebody who is powerful, taking their money and then trafficking them across the border. I would argue it is a righteous and just desire for Christians to want an orderly border. Now, that does not justify for 1 second, I want to add this, a racist or a demeaning or a discriminatory attitude for people of another race or another country. We should not in any way be a part of mocking or harming or being hateful toward anyone. That is absolutely inconsistent with a Christian position. But again, I can be loving and merciful, and at the same time believe that the laws of our country should be just as they can be. If you want to argue about what the law should be, that's another argument. Okay, let's have that argument. But once you have the law, it should be enforced. And so, again, I'll give you a quick example. When the hurricane happened this fall, and people were hurting, there was a local apartment complex where people were displaced, thousands of people, really hundreds of families, thousands of people. Calvary was one of the first churches on the spot to help, and other churches were. I mean, I was talking, the mayor called me, the sheriff called me, we were down there, within a matter of hours, and feeding people. And most of those who were displaced were Hispanics in that particular apartment complex. Now, nobody that day was going, is this person here legally, illegally? That wasn't our job. Our job, these people are hungry. They've been kicked out of their home. Some of them are sleeping outside. And the mayor, the sheriff, we're all trying to solve a humanitarian crisis. It was a national news story. It was less than 2 miles from our Clearwater campus. And we would feed and help people all day long. Does that mean that I don't think the government authorities should, at the same time, be looking to see if people are violating the law and then enforcing the law? Look, I hope they do it as compassionately as they can, and I certainly want them to do it in a just manner. But we want the government to do what it should do, and it should enforce the law. And we as followers of Christ should always be ready to show mercy and kindness to everyone, not to circumvent the law. That's not what I'm saying, but to show mercy and kindness in every way that we can.
And I think that's the big point. And I think so often, we've said this on the podcast a few times, like, you voted for President Trump. I voted for President Trump, but there are times when you say, hey, he's not a perfect man. And sometimes the things that come out of his mouth, you're like, okay, like we could have been a little bit softer with that. And so we look at how people view Christianity, and, the evangelical vote was so much for President Trump. And you're like, okay, is this what you guys are trying to promote, or is this what you guys are supporting? And that's where Does that make sense? Yeah.
I don't know, by the way, I've ever said that on the podcast. But
I'm sorry. Yeah. Sorry.
It's true. And more than 80% of evangelicals did.
Yeah.
But it's fine. I don't mind somebody knowing that. President Trump is a complicated person. There are many things about his past. There are many things even about his character that I could say, I don't agree with that. I didn't like that. I'm concerned about that. I'm not saying he may do something today I don't like. Sure. I don't intend to come on every week and go, hey, I agree with that, but I don't agree with that. That's not my role. I voted for him for a multitude of reasons that I think are pretty self-evident to many evangelicals, and I still love people who disagreed with me. Not because I think in everything he's going to do exactly what I want or exactly the right way, but on the whole, I felt like his position on issues like life and justice and religious liberty and a number of other things were far superior than the alternative. And I maintain that, but I'm not mad at people who disagree. I just, that's the view. Again, I'm not going to get here and justify everything he does or doesn't do, because we do that every week.
Right, yeah.
We do that every week. But I'm very happy with many things that he has done. And what I'm trying to say is on the issues of like DEI and immigration, where you hear a lot of voices on the political left and even in the like Christian left saying these views are inconsistent with the teachings of Jesus. And I want to go, whoa, not so fast.
Right.
Not so fast. It is not inconsistent with the teaching. In fact, I would argue DEI itself may be inconsistent with the teachings of the Bible to show partiality. And I would argue that while the immigration issue is a complex, thorny, difficult issue, I understand why people wrestle with it. It is not an inconsistent position with biblical worldview to say we should have laws. They should be as just as we can make them, as imperfect people can make them, that we should enforce them as fairly as human beings can do. And I'm not suggesting they're always perfectly just or perfectly fair. But it is right to have laws, and it is right to enforce those laws. And when it comes to the issue of immigration, it is right for a government to say there's an appropriate number that should be able to migrate into the country, and then to enforce the law to ensure that that law is carried forth. No. That's not an inconsistent position with showing love and kindness to all kinds of people.
No, I think it's a great lesson for all of us to hear. The application question to that is for me would be, okay, so we're pastoring here at Calvary, we're looking at our people, and this is a conversation that's happening all around our people. Sure. It's happening at the quote unquote water cooler, whatever that looks like for you in your life. Yeah. How do we equip our people to have these conversations with a biblical mindset, but also, as Peter wrote, with grace and truth?
Yeah. Well, it's why we're doing conversations like this.
Right.
So we kind of help people think through. And I think the first, and there's no one answer. I mean, we want to do all kinds of teaching and training, need to do more about that because these are important issues. But here's what I would say first of all. Before we look at issues with a political lens, this is what Trump believes, this is what Biden believed, or the Democrats believed, or whatever. How do we think biblically, through a biblical theological lens? That's what we're trying to do. And the knee-jerk reaction today is to say, hey, my tribe did this, therefore I'm for it.
Right.
Or those who don't like President Trump may go, well, I don't like him, so they're against it. Without stepping back and going, okay, how do I view this through a biblical lens? I think that's a good first start. And then the second thing I would just say is avoid the emotional manipulation that is out there. And one of the things, author Joe Rigney has written about this and others, one of the things that's out there is this kind of emotional sabotage. I think that's the name of the book. Escapes me right now, but doesn't seem right. But anyway, it's close to that. But one of the things that you're seeing out there is that people who have a little bit of knowledge of the Bible are using that to manipulate Christian people to a particular political viewpoint. And so I'm just asking you, when people throw arguments, and maybe it doesn't sound quite right, and I've been hoodwinked myself, believe me, there's a couple of things, we talked about those a while back, where you immediately go, this sounds right. It just sounds so right. And then you think about it more deeply and you go, wait a second. I thought we were talking about this, and now I'm supporting something else altogether. And we're finding more things uncovered almost daily now in the U.S. international aid and what tax money was being used to promote across the seas that are completely antithetical to our Christian belief. And that means they're harmful to other people. They harm our neighbors. And so it's absolutely right to say, man, we need to I'm glad somebody's looking at that, and I hope that they do take a hatchet to a lot of that, because our nation is, in some cases, sadly, in the past has been promoting values completely antithetical to our own Christian beliefs, but in some ways also antithetical to American convictions as well. That should not be. So for that, I'm grateful. And, I just want people to think, hey, theologically first. And number two, avoid the knee-jerk reactions because somebody is yanking your emotional chain.
Mm-hmm.
Stop and think about it first. Make sure you understand the issue. And so when somebody says, hey, if you follow Jesus, then, you can't be, how can you not allow people to come to America who are seeking a better life?
Mm-hmm.
All of that sounds so good until you begin to press into it and realize, okay, there's some problems with that view. And it's not only false, it's actually hurting people, and it's actually helping some very bad people.
Mm.
And so we just need to grow up and ask ourselves, train ourselves to think and act with greater discernment than to be manipulated by certain voices in the political realm and the social realm.
Mm-hmm. I want to just bring up, so I have a memory, it just kind of popped in my head as you were speaking right there. So me and my son, Paxton, he's my older son, he'll be 6 next week. We were at a Rays game this past season, and I didn't know this was going to happen, but before the game started, about, I would say 150 to 200 people were brought out onto the outfield, and they had a ceremony for these individuals who had just become American citizens. And this is not something back then that, I wasn't thinking a lot about political season, really hadn't started up yet. People weren't having these conversations. But I remember I was like getting emotional. Like, these people worked so hard to be there. And I sat there, I tried to explain this to a 5-year-old why this was important, obviously. It's incredible. And when you see it, and I would encourage you, if you're listening right now, like, go and find someone who's immigrated to this country, whether their parents or their grandparents, someone who's actually witnessed it, and have that conversation and get their viewpoint on this.
A lot of it's unbelievable. And I've talked to several.
Mm-hmm.
And they've learned more about our Constitution and our history than many of our citizens know. Our country has a rich, long history in immigration. Mm-hmm. That is true. But even that truth gets then manipulated into a kind of emotional sabotage that makes us think, therefore, you should allow for unrestricted immigration.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's no, that doesn't fall.
Mm-hmm.
There was a long process of an orderly, we talk about how the people went through Ellis Island. There was an orderly process in which people were documented coming into the country, and the government was trying to, how many people can come in, how many people can safely live, how many people can they support themselves, and so on and so forth. And it would just be unloving both to the immigrant trying to move and to the citizens of the country who are expecting the government to do what government should do. It's unloving to both of those sets of neighbors for us to suddenly say, hey, we should have unrestricted immigration without any laws, and it doesn't matter who's coming into the country. Mm-hmm. So that's what I would say. And again, I also want to encourage people, maybe from a conservative persuasion, don't use that as an excuse to denigrate an immigrant family or a family from another country, or to assume that even all the people who came illegally are in fact violent criminals. I understand you can argue that everybody violated the law. I get that. But that does not mean they're all violent criminals or bad people in the sense of they're antisocial. Again, I'm not saying that justifies the illegal entry into the country. I'm saying let's be careful not to denigrate people unfairly. Are there criminals, gangs? 100%. And if the government had done a better job at the border, they wouldn't be here. And I'm glad we're at least trying to do a better job. I really am. But at the same time, let's be careful not to unfairly denigrate people without knowing the facts.
And it seems like there are steps being taken over even this past couple days where it looks like the border's getting more and more secure, where I even saw something that even Mexico's sending some of their military up to the border. So you have now a political party in place that are really, they're seeing this issue and they're trying to fix it. And you mentioned this last week, where we're going to see stories, we're going to see things that should break our heart, but at the end of the day, like, we have to continue to be the church and continue to look at this at a biblical worldview.
There are stories that break our hearts all the time in our county. And, people get arrested. I'm sure today, it's going to be a heartbreaking story for a family. When laws are enforced and laws are broken, there are terrible consequences. It's heartbreaking, and compassionate people are moved by this. And by the way, this shouldn't be a Republican or a Democrat position. I can quote Democrats from the past, from President Obama to President Clinton, and to many who would speak out about illegal immigration. Now, many governments, Republican and Democrat, just haven't had the will to do anything about it. So, again, there are heartbreaking stories. It's okay to be moved with compassion for people who are in dire circumstances. Should we be moved to help where we can? Absolutely. We should show the mercy and love of Christ. But at the same time, that is not inconsistent with believing that it's okay to have a sovereign nation that has laws, and that those laws are being enforced. Those two things are not inconsistent. That's our point. And I think if we look at these issues, these hot-button issues, a little more closely, avoid the manipulative tactics that politicians try to use. And by the way, frankly, the news media tries to use. That's why they're going to tell certain stories and not others. Right? They're going to tell a story. If they want to move you in one place, they're going to tell you a heart-rending story that you look at it and you do go, this is so unfair. I wish I could just, step into this situation. But they're not going to tell you the other story of maybe a violent criminal who committed a crime and hurt somebody. Why? They want you to feel one thing and not the other. And that can work the other way also. So just understand when you're being manipulated, get the facts, and we're trying to help you think through these things in a responsible yet biblical fashion.
And I think that's huge, Pastor. And I hope, and I know you're very comfortable with it. And I think over the next, year, maybe this year, we'll spend some more time. Won't be every week, but hitting some of these hot button political points, because it is important. It is we want this podcast to be something that equips people, that as you continue to lead us as a church, lead our staff, like we look to you and say, okay, Pastor, like this is happening. How can we look at this biblically?
And this is a great forum. Podcasting, the reason podcasting across the country is so popular, and I'm sure ours is up there, got to be in the top.
Joe Rogan, Pastor Willie Rice. So
look, the reason it is because these kind of long-form conversations allow people to converse, whereas the old kind of corporate media, I call them corporate media, the corporate media, you get a soundbite. You get a 30-second soundbite because it's all about ratings and entertainment.
Right.
While we want people to listen, we really, ratings are not that big a deal. This is our living. We get to talk about it and think about it, and it's just a better forum in which to wrestle with some of these more complex issues. So glad we got to at least wade into some deep waters. Hope maybe the conversation helped, and if you don't agree with something or it hits you wrong, hope it stirs up some thoughts, and let's think deeply about this. How do we... it's not inconsistent to say I want to be a compassionate, merciful person. I also want to be a lawful person, and I love my country. Those aren't inconsistent things. Jesus was full of grace and truth. Grace and truth aren't inconsistent. They go together, and so does our human empathy and compassion, along with our knowledge and our commitment to having an orderly and healthy country and a healthy culture in which to raise our children and grandchildren. Those two things are not inconsistent, in my opinion.
No, I agree with you. I completely agree with you. And I just thank you for letting me be a part of those conversations, because I get to learn, I get to hear your voice, and I know our people love it too. And, we have so many great things that happen here at Calvary. One's happening tonight. And again, it's Wednesday when we're recording this, and so tonight we're having a great time with Pastor Jim Cymbala, where we're having actually a very pointed prayer time. If you want to just dive into that a little bit, I think it's important.
This is Wednesday night, February 5th, and so depending on when you're listening to this, I know some people, it's not necessarily the first thing they do when it comes to it.
Right.
But just, we're having a night to pray for children and grandchildren that are prodigals or unsaved and who they're not walking with God, whatever their soteriological situation. They're not where they need to be spiritually. And we're just going to call out to God, and we've invited our church family together and cry out. So if you're listening to this and maybe you missed that or something, it may be on our YouTube channel. I think there will be some of that service that lives on. And we just encourage you, first of all, if you're listening, get here tonight. You do not want to miss it. You want to be in the room. It's going to be incredible. But if you hear it later, maybe listen to that, and Pastor Jim has a good word for how we can pray. And we love our friend Jim and Carol Cymbala. They've become such great friends. And maybe, I don't know, maybe we have to get them on the podcast one day.
I said that, and I would love that, yeah.
We'll see if we can put pressure on him or something.
Yeah.
Anyway, it'll be a wonderful night tonight.
It's going to be great. And that we will link that service in the podcast notes. That way, if you do miss it, you can come back and you can watch that service. It'll be great. But Pastor, I appreciate you. I appreciate your time today. Appreciate your wisdom and just helping us see things with a biblical worldview. It's very important, especially in times like this where, people have the right to have conversations. Those conversations are happening more often than not, whether it's on social media or wherever. It's good. It's great. So I hope you, as you listen today, I hope you feel equipped. I hope you do feel encouraged, knowing that everything that we say here is with the love of Jesus. And we love our neighbor, all of them, and we want to. We also love our nation. We love. We're just trying to be biblical in what we do.
Right. All of that goes together.
It does.
We love the Lord. We love our family. We love our neighbor, and we love our country. We love people in other countries.
Yeah.
And all of those things can be done in a proper and orderly way, and we shouldn't be apologizing for any part of that.
Right. So, well, we appreciate you listening this week. Hopeful to see you tonight at our prayer gathering. But if we do not, I would love it if you would join us at one of our Calvary locations this weekend on Sunday, whether you're in Crystal Beach, East Lake, Safety Harbor, Clearwater, Seminole, or our Hispanic campus. We would love to see you this weekend. Have a great time, and we will talk to you soon.